There we go. Hi, folks.
Yay!
Success to a degree. Hi, folks. Welcome, everyone. It's been a half hour of technical workshop here, trying to get cameras to cooperate and all kinds of things. So that's Trisha still working on the problem. uh, it's been a ride. Okay, we got it. I think we're going to go with what we got here. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Um, I sure hope we hang on. We're just going to take a minute here. I'm going to go and see what I'm getting. All right, that's going to have to be it there, Tricia. Okay, great.
Yep.
Okay, whew. All right, yay. We made it. All right. Thanks to everybody for joining us. We thanks to Tricia too. We've got a real package going on here tonight. Um, we're not going to get one camera to cooperate, but we'll be okay. We'll be okay. Um, So, just a couple of announcements. One is join us now for the third Fiber Talk Meditates. And I'm hearing a speaker in the background too. Is that, can somebody cut me off there? Um, so, the third Tuesday or Sunday at 2 o'clock Eastern Time on our YouTube channel. Join us for the Meditates Sunday hour. And then remember, Fiber Talk Monday Hearts is Monday night, actually anytime Monday. Post pictures of your heart stitching. And then Sunday's podcast guest will be Sandy Higgins of Sandy's Finishing. And so we get to hear about primarily needlepoint finishing, but finishing in general. And a fascinating conversation with her. And then right now, the tentative plan for the next um, uh, tour from Australia is November 4. So mark that down. Going to be Indian tapestries, and I'm assuming that is Indian from India. So that'll be colorful and interesting. Um, but April's working on that. It looks like the 4th is going to be when that is. So mark that down so you don't miss that. And then you'll note on the screen tonight, we have two sponsors. We really appreciate that. Needle in a Haystack and Sassy Jacks. And Kathy at Needle in a Haystack has asked me to say here that they're happy to sponsor this live show with Tricia, as Kathy is fans of her work, both at the design level and the work she has helped inspire in stitchers around the globe. And Needle in a Haystack carries the supplies you'll need to create your own 17th century inspired project, including fine linens and silk threads. If you've not ventured into finer count linens, you might consider one of their silk sampling packs, which include linen and appropriate silks for the counts in the package. And if you're inspired to stitch a whitework sampler, Kathy has Darlene Osteen's popular English whitework sampler, and you'll find a link for those items on their homepage. So thanks to Kathy for sponsoring the show, and then thanks also to Kim at Sassy Jack Stitchery. And we've talked a couple of times about the new sassafras samplers, Christian Henry 1816. Check that out. That's a real nice new sampler from the Sassafras Samplers, which is Kim's reproduction brand. And then remember now the Jeanette Douglas Learning Stitches. And coming up now will be my stitching album. So you can still join the Learning Stitches. Coming up is my stitching album. The combination will give you a real nice package of stitches that many of them I'm sure that you may not have tried before. And then we're hoping that we're going to have a live seminar in May with Jeanette Douglas in at Sassy Jacks. And then also you'll want to, if you're interested in the meditative stitching, remember that Kim has the Fiber Talk colorway for the basket weave design. That's all the colors for that, and that's at Cosmo Thread. And I have to tell you, I'm really liking the Cosmo Thread. It's very nice. Might be getting some more of that just to have around, but just beautiful colors, and it stitches up really nice. So check that out. Kim has the full line of Cosmo threads, so check that out with her, and she'll help you out. So thanks to both, and encourage you to support both of our sponsors tonight. They are what makes this all possible. So we appreciate that. Tricia, is going to talk to us about 17th century whitework samplers. Holy smokes, we got a load of pictures, some videos, and she's got some things there on the table to show us. So I'm just going to shut up and say, Tricia, how'd you get involved in this sampler thing? How'd you, what, what started this thing?
Oh my gosh. Well, I've always loved white work, and uh, white work was something that I used to do when I was a little girl. I got very involved in Hardanger when I was 12, and I started teaching it. So this is kind of the natural evolution of that, getting all the way to the Reticella work.
Yeah. Now, did you learn and get started out of a museum observances? You now own some
No,
samplers.
yeah, no, well, the start of the Hardanger was, of course, in the 1980s. That was a really a big thing. But I'm kind of doing this as people who've been on and listened to the podcast before were on last time and saw the caskets. They kind of know that I'm seeming like I'm sampling all aspects of 17th century embroidery, and that is the truth, because I'm doing this massive research project where I'm interested in understanding why this really over the top embroidery was done in this period and how it fits into the history of the culture. And sometimes you have to get into a subject very deeply before you can kind of see the truth or the larger picture
Right.
of everything. And so Whitework Samplers was definitely one of those things on my bucket list in that exploration. And I really felt that the time was now that the vast embroidery audience is really their skills have just taken off, and they're ready for an exploration like this
Mm-hmm.
into white work and needle lace and cut work and all of that. So I decided to go for it. When you do something like this, you have to, though, try to find uh, enough examples to work with. And what I'd been doing previously is I had been working with the museums and looking at the objects in the museums. And one of the problems that I have with the 17th century embroidered samplers is that most museums have properly conserved their pieces, and that means stitching them down to a conservation board. And that doesn't give you the opportunity to see the back of the samplers, which is where a lot of information is held, especially when you ask that big question of like, well, how did they do that?
Yeah.
So I went in search of a couple pieces that I could own potentially and therefore take them off of the backing. Um, or maybe they were held, unfortunately, between glass, which one of them was, and so I could kind of rescue it and then get the access to the back of the piece.
Yeah.
So you kind of know sometimes when you're ready to teach a course because things drop in your lap. And in this particular case, in the course of literally 3 weeks, 4 samplers came on sale that were two of which were absolutely museum quality, and I was able to procure them at you know if you want to call it reasonable prices. I don't think my husband thinks it would be
Yeah.
reasonable prices, but he doesn't have to know, does he?
No.
And I know my mother's on this, watching this, and she should not tell him. But getting them was fantastic because it allowed me the access to what I needed to really go back and forth looking at, where I wouldn't be able to do it in a museum.
Yeah.
So
Now, when
I
you
will
when
act.
you when you
Go ahead.
figure that out, when you look at the back and figure that out, obviously you're not going to unstitch any of that. Is it a microscope, heavy magnifier, and then with a probe of some kind of tracing threads? That's got to be
uh,
tedious work.
it is, it can be, but I do have this really cool camera that I found many years ago, which has this amazing digital macro function, and have learned to use it to do all kinds of nifty things. And some of the newer things like the iPhone, the iPad have some really amazing macros. You can put lenses on it. And so I do that. And I do a lot of, I'll be looking at something, tipping it in the light, taking photographs, looking at the photographs very carefully. And sometimes it's a matter of knowing mechanics and then going back and seeing, does the mechanics actually match what other people have said it is in the
Okay.
past. And I know I was telling you this earlier, how because so many things are actually stitched down, There are things like a border stitch, which is used on the 17th century samplers, where most of us would look at it and say, "Oh, that's a four-sided stitch." Well, when I got them off the backings and turned them over, I realized that at least in all the examples that I've been able to look at the back, it's not a four-sided stitch.
Mm-hmm.
It is more of a reverse hem stitch, which looks like a four-sided stitch from the front. And that was quite a surprise to me, although it does make some sense because you pull the vertical threads together in the back and you give them some reinforcement, which since you're cutting them, it makes a lot of sense that you'd want to do that
Mm-hmm.
mechanically. So
Yeah.
yeah, so there's often surprises. And another big surprise is actually that the fact that they when you take them off of the and you really have a chance to look at the edge of the sampler, and I'm going to take my camera over,
Okay.
and I know because I know you can do this, and look at that.
Whoops. Hang on just a second here.
Yep,
Let me get this
I
one.
know we've got the lag and the YouTube and everything too.
Yep. There we go. Okay.
Okay, and I hope everybody will tell me if that's in focus because I can't see it from
It's
where I'm sitting.
in focus, but you got to move it to the other way. Keep going. Keep going.
Well, I'm trying to show you the edge.
Okay. All right. So do you have that centered pretty well? Yep.
Yeah. So the thing about it is that you see that edge and that the embroidery and the cuts come up really close to the edge there on all of the bands,
Mm-hmm.
and you think to yourself, wow, how did they go about doing that? And the amazing answer when you get to the back and you see where all the stitching goes and where is that they hemmed this first. This
Oh.
entire piece of linen was hemmed first, and then the cut work was done. And so far, every piece I've looked at, you get the same conclusion looking at it that way. And
Huh.
that's a real shocker because you pull out here. I'll pull out, try to be careful with and you see this incredibly long sampler
Yes.
as you go along here. And you think to yourself that you'd be doing it on a scroll frame, right?
Right.
That's how you'd want to do it.
Yep.
And you probably would say, well, I'm not going to do it with hemmed. Of course not. I'm going
Right.
to hem it afterwards. So that was one of the major surprises when I was really starting this up. And of course, the evidence, as I like to say, the evidence is right in front of you because you have this. You have this
Mm-hmm.
unworked area at the bottom. And everybody who sees those unworked areas basically doesn't really think about it very much, and they just fold it back up underneath the piece if they frame it. And I'll show you another piece that I have that's done that way, where I framed it in that way here.
Mm-hmm.
This has a really long area like that underneath it where it wasn't finished, but it's all hemmed all the way around it as if you
Oh.
were going to work on it. And I mean, how long has that been staring us all in the face that they're not finished always, and that they've been, in fact, hemmed first before that they've been worked.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought I could have you get up the video. Let's see,
Okay.
it's the fifth one. Probably it talks about the
White work clip needle lace pillow.
yes,
Okay.
exactly.
All right.
If you take me off the
Yep. Doing that now.
okay.
Okay. All right. Yep. We got that up now.
All right, so I believe the image that you see first is the image of the sampler itself that I was just showing you, folded, showing you that there was a hem to it and that there's selvages on the end, and that the sampler is very long. There we go.
Yeah.
And if you go to the next image,
Okay.
what you see in that image is a whole lot of women working in a room. And that is actually the front piece, meaning that the cover of a oh, I think you went backwards. There
Oh
we are.
no, I got it again. Yeah.
That's actually the cover of one of the major embroidery pattern books for white work. And this particular front cover has an enormous amount of information in it. It's almost like they were using a course and show the covers of all the pattern books. It actually shows the technology. It's giving instruction to people of how to work things. And in this particular one, if you'll see the woman on the right hand side who is old, and she has these glasses on, which are absolutely
Yeah,
hilariously
I want that
thick
look.
rimmed. Yeah, exactly. It's like nerd. But she's obviously the older woman teacher, and she has this young woman who's standing next to her with a long piece of linen. And if you look at it, you see that it's all cross-hatched in the middle.
Yep,
Well, it's done that in order to imply the hem
yep.
around the outside of it. And you see on the left-hand side, you see a woman with a slate frame, but her doesn't really look like it's got linen on it. And that's because it's actually a net, and she's doing fillet work. The woman in the middle behind her is working on a ruff, and the woman next to her is working on a large piece of linen. And if we go to the next piece of the video,
Okay.
I believe you see the woman with the fillet work.
Yes.
Let's see. And you can see the pattern book that she's looking at. She's doing her work from that. And then if you go to the next one, I believe that is a closer view of the woman with the crazy glasses.
Whoop. Yep. Hang on. I got ahead of the deal here.
Okay.
There. Okay.
So you got the one with the crazy glasses
Yeah.
now?
Yeah. I love that look.
So if you've noticed, in all of these cases, these women have pillows on their
Yes.
laps, and they're doing work with pillows on their laps. And in fact, you've jumped ahead, I think. Oh no, you jump back again.
Yeah, I did.
So what I think these two women that we're looking at right now is actually two women working two band samplers. And you've got the roll of the band sampler up at the front of it on her lap. And she's got pins sticking out of the sampler, which is holding it in place while she's working with it.
Mm-hmm.
And the pins are in place so that she can put her hands underneath it to tent a certain amount of it up so that she can work with her needle.
Uh-huh.
And if you, this is my supposition, and if you look at the next piece, this is a virginal painting. You can definitely see that embroidery was being done this way.
Yes.
And this young girl is praying, and she has her black work embroidery, which is again a long strip already that has been pre-hemmed, and you can see the pins in it that is holding it down to the pillow, and it's rolled up. The previous work, or the work she's going to do, is all rolled up, which is pretty. And you can see her lovely needle there too.
Yes.
So she was in process. And the last pictures that you'll see here are people working in progress. Another Mother of the Virgin, the Virgin Mother photograph with all these different women working. And the great thing is that they're doing this work with regular linens as well. So you know that those are linens work versus what's the embroidery work. And we can see the woman on the far left who is working on likely a band sampler as well.
Mm-hmm.
So we actually work, and I think if you were to pull up photograph,
it's interesting.
7.
Interesting. The angels.
Go ahead. The angels.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I don't know if anybody has. Go ahead.
Is the hemming, is that before they actually made banding? Because banding is basically pre-hemmed. So could you do the same thing with banding because it's already hemmed?
You mean something that you've purchased that's banding?
Yeah.
Has a selvage on the top and the bottom.
Right.
I guess you could do that.
Because it looks like, it looks like early banding.
Yes.
Like before it was maybe made, they would pre-hem it, and then somebody got the idea, well, let's just make it with selvage on the top and bottom so you don't have to hem it and you can just go.
Yes, you could do that
Maybe.
for, like, let's say that the black piece that she was working could have definitely
Hmm.
been banding. I
Yeah.
agree. But in this particular case, for the white work samplers, we know that because we have the selvage on the top and the bottom, that they were definitely
Right.
whacking off a large piece of linen, long piece, and then
Right.
they were just started at the top and went to the bottom, or maybe not. They
Yeah.
didn't finish
Yeah.
it.
I know, because suddenly I'm just like, hey, that looks like banding, and
Yeah.
Yeah,
maybe that's where I don't. Maybe does that where banding came about?
I have no idea.
Yeah, I don't
No
know.
idea. So if you pick up picture '07, Gary, you can
Okay.
see me actually working in this way. And the funny thing is, I didn't find this particular photograph until I had figured out how to work on a needle lace pillow myself, and I was working these pieces on a needle lace pillow.
Hmm.
And I don't know if you have that picture up
Yep.
yet.
Yeah, it's up. Yeah.
Okay, great. So there are examples of these pieces where after you cut out the linen threads you want to take out, you have a parchment, or in this particular case, it's contact paper over the pattern, stitched behind the open area. And that is pinned, the entire sampler is pinned onto a piece of muslin, which is stretched over a tube that is on a pillow. And what that does is it pulls up, the area where you're actually going to do needle weaving or needle lace, and it allows you to use both of your hands at the same time. And you can do needle lace really fast that way.
Hmm.
You know how normally you'd hold it in your hand and you'd bunch it up with your hand and you'd be trying to stick your finger up a little bit behind it and trying to pick up an area to stitch?
Hmm.
Well, this solves that problem. But then you have both hands to work with the tension at the same time.
Yeah.
And I was really surprised how fast I was able to go. But you can see here that I've used pins to pin it down as well as roll up the sampler, which is already partially worked.
Yep.
So it's surprising how the method works very, very well. I have everybody make a needle lace pillow in the class to do some of this work,
Hmm.
as you will be doing yourself, Gary.
I know. I know. It's going to be
But the pillow is
interesting.
great. The pillow is great because it sits on top of your lap, and you can make it bigger and bigger depending on how big you need your lap to be.
Okay. All right.
So that gives you kind of an idea of some of the process,
Yeah.
and some of the surprises that came out of starting this, looking at this class. Um, I don't know if you have any questions from anybody yet, but I can keep going.
None yet.
None yet.
So,
Okay.
so
No.
this really is no different than like bobbin lace, where they have the pattern down there and you put pins in. So it's the same
It's
kind of.
very similar. Yes,
Yeah.
it's very similar.
Hmm.
And you can see, it's the same period of time, and you see all the time different portraits where somebody's either doing this handwork, and you see this on the front pieces as well. You'll always see the pillow there. There's one front piece where it actually does show the reticella flat on, pattern underneath it, and it's obvious that's what's going on
Uh-huh.
to it. And then you'll have in the corner of it, you'll have somebody with their bobbins hanging off of their pillow, which is a different shape.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is a time frame where in the 1630s, 1640s, when there was a big switchover between people were like, hey, we could probably make this bobbin lace look kind of like this reticella, and it's cheaper to make and faster to make.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a lot of joint things in pattern books at that time.
Uh-huh.
Right. So Mary's asking for your class, your 17th century whitework class.
Mm-hmm.
How do you frame up the thing? Scroll frame or stretcher bars, and what size?
I'll put that into the class, but because there's two different sizes of samplers, but only the counted work is done on a frame, and I did that for modernity, meaning that's something that we all are very comfortable with. But it looks like they didn't use a frame at that period, that they were doing it on the pillow. But then when we get to the needle lace portion of the samplers that are done in the class, I switch everybody over to the pillow. And It's a new experience, but it's really so far all the people, because I've got like about 200 people go through this class already, they like it because it's very rare that you get both hands to work with, and you find that some of the stitches work very, much better if you have both hands. To one hand that's moving the needle and the other hand that's tugging on the linen thread.
Right.
Right. So it's
Oh,
a new
this is good.
experience, but we should all have new experiences.
This is going to be a ride. This is going to be a ride.
For those of you who don't know, Gary and Beth signed up for the course this morning.
Yeah.
Oh.
So trial by fire, Gary.
I know. That's
Ooh.
exactly what I'm reading out of this. Yep.
You know there's a casket in your future right after that.
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think so.
So I'm going to move back over to the long sampler and show you
Okay.
an area of stitching, which was also another surprise to me. So we can see the top of this sampler here, and it kind of looks like, you know, boringness, right? It's at the top of it, you see all of this, maybe hem stitching. Is that what it is? And the closer and closer you get to it, the more you go, is that hem stitching? I don't know if that's hem stitching. It looks kind of pebbly. It has a lot of space between things. And myself, as soon as I got this thing off of the backing, I was like, I don't know what that is, which was a real surprise to me. I started searching cut work books. I started searching Ukrainian, all kinds of different ethnicities looking for this. I knew what the stuff below it was. That's
Mhm.
dove's eye bands right there.
Mhm.
And then I'm going to move over, so I hope I don't make anybody feel ill here, to another sampler. I'll put it, I'll move it towards me. This particular piece is just full of it. And instead of just being those little geometric bands, it makes flowers
Mhm.
and it makes acorns. I don't know if you see the acorn band now there.
Yep.
And birds. I mean, this sampler is full of it. And then it's used also to make the spacing in between what I would like to call these snowflake reticella areas.
Hmm.
And here you find it way down here, back in this geometric form, just as a very thin band,
Mhm.
looking in between things right there. So that took me a while to figure out what was going on. Of course, it had to be one of the first lessons because it was one of the first types of bands that you see on almost every sampler. And that was frustrating to me. Here, I'm going to show you back here. There's more of it on this particular sampler too. If you see it now in the figural and slightly geometric sense on this particular long sampler too. So as soon as I really recognized it, I saw it everywhere. And I'm going to have you pull up the vertical needle weaving or modified vertical needle weaving video.
All right.
I'll give you a second for that.
All right. Coming up. Okay, here we go.
All right. I'm trying to make sure I don't make everybody sick moving my phone
Right.
around.
Right.
So I think on that video, there's a nice picture of, I'm kind of waiting for it to come up with you on YouTube here.
Yeah.
There's a nice picture of the needle weaving. There we go. Great. And so what you see here is actually how to do this stitch. You first pull out all your horizontal threads, and then you're left with your vertical threads. And you take your linen thread or your silk thread and you whip around them, wrapping the bars, wrapping two threads together. And you go up, down, up, down, up, down, doing that. Once you've filled your entire area of that, then you come back with a second thread and you go over the two threads and then in between them over it. And that forms one of the stitches. And that's not anything like normal needle weaving at all.
No.
And I've called it kind of this modified vertical needle weaving. I did have somebody in the middle of the course who found a piece in Norway and was able to send me a picture of something from Norway. But I found this on some of the bed sheets of the 17th century now. And it makes a really, really strong interlacing between two pieces of linen by doing this. So if you go to the next picture, you'll see how they form patterns.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm seeing you just empty an area of horizontal threads and then it's just open open season on how you combine the verticals.
Exactly. That's exactly how you do it. And if you have to go between an area of verticals, then you just wrap around the vertical to leave it open and then start interlacing them together again
Mm-hmm.
to make these acorns, as you see here. And the direction of the little stitch that goes in between them changes its direction, angle,
Yeah.
kind of, and then you know that was going up versus down. So if you go to the next one.
So Sandy's wondering if there are names for all these different designs and the different
No,
stitches.
no. That's the thing, is that other than the pattern books, in this white work pattern books is really the only books that existed at that time. And we have one poem, and that's it in terms of trying to figure out. And the poem doesn't relate to pictures, so we don't know what these things are
Oh,
called. We have maybe modern names that we've put to them, and that's it. So,
so is white work different from Hardanger? And
yes.
how is it different from Hardanger?
Hardanger is based on a set of geometric blocks, little satin stitch blocks of a uniform size that are worked, horizontally, vertically, like stair steps. And then you cut where the threads go into the fabric, and it creates these square spaces with the leftover material in between. And then you can do actual needle weaving, and then you can do picots on it, which are something that's shared between the two areas. But white work would generally be the term you would use above everything that is worked in white and maybe cut. And Hardanger is a regional specific technique that's from the Hardanger Fjord region of Norway. And what I'm doing here is the English version, kind of based on the Italian.
Okay.
And so this picture that we're seeing up here is some of these blocks that you could do in between areas that you're going to add these little reticella snowflakes to. And if you go to the next one, I believe what you'll see, you can tell me if it's true, Gary, because I'm behind you by 10 seconds.
Yeah. No, I'm at the drawing now.
Okay, the drawing, yes. So this is actually a page from a pattern book. And these are the first patterns I've ever found for this technique. And it wasn't until I had actually worked this technique and figured it out that I was able to find it in the pattern books. And if you look really closely at them, you'll even see that the little lines at the bottom part that is going horizontally actually are staggered, just as the ones in the actual examples would be staggered.
Mm-hmm.
And all these kind of bent areas in between that are cross-hatched, you saw that particular technique in my sampler in the picture beforehand.
Right. Let's see if I can go back to that.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay, so at some level it looks fairly random, but then when you see these diagrams, then you see there's definitely a plan to all of this. It's not just
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Huh.
And then if you go to the last one, you have a question, Jennifer?
Yes. Kathy wants to know if white work or Hardanger is older, or do you know?
I don't know, but I suspect that the Italian reticella may be older than the Hardanger, having been to the Hardanger region and seen the examples in the museums.
Okay.
Tends towards late 17th, early 18th, but I really would never want to be quoted on that because I'm not an expert in the very old Hardanger.
Right.
But the Hardanger that we see when we go into the Hardanger Fjord area is worked on high thread count linen with linen thread, and it's absolutely exquisite.
Wow.
What we tend to do now is we work it on Hardanger cloth, which is about twice the size, and with DMC cotton number 8. And while I did plenty of that when I was young and love it and everything, after seeing the original, I was like gobsmacked. And I had to buy all of this linen thread in Norway and their linen. And I'm still working on it. It's kind of put away right now, but I'm working on my entire collar and working on a folk outfit for myself.
Oh, wow.
Well, and that was really the purpose of Yvette Stanton's book, was to go back to the original and do it on linen and get away from that hard hanger cloth that we call it. Yeah.
Right, right, right.
And so
Yeah,
all right, so then when you do that, not to get away from the 17th century
yeah.
samplers, but when you do that, you really get a delicate lace effect then, huh?
Oh yeah, it's much more delicate,
Yeah.
and it's just that was the experience to me that said I want to work linen on linen,
Uh-huh.
because seeing linen thread on linen, it's just the it blends into the linen more in a much more harmonious way.
Okay.
It's really exquisite. Plus, you can wash it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the other thing.
Key
And they
element.
wash
Yeah.
their shirt because it's shirts. They wear their shirts,
Yeah.
and they do that. So the picture, if we put it back up, I see it. It is back up. Right there, we actually see that these pattern books actually had real stitch information in them. They look like, I mean, they're engravings in wood, but they actually have stitch information, and that the star above is showing that you should be using two stitches next to each other and then skipping a space, and then two stitches close together again in the needle lace. And if you look really close at it, if you can get your screen up to your nose, you will see that it's actually two engraved lines. So it's a stitch instruction manual. And you see also the circles, as I have a little arrow pointed out, are these little spider webs that we see in the sampler of mine. So I think it's really exciting that to see that there's actually stitch instructions being engraved there, and the commensurately, some printers were thinking, hey, this is great. We can sell all these books to these ladies who are doing the stitching. So we're going to start inventing some patterns, and there are pattern books, and I go over this in the class, where you can't work the pattern
Mm.
because the pattern is impossible to work. And the guys were just like, hey, we just put a bunch of triangles here,
Oh, okay.
make a lot of stars and all that. But if you actually know how to do the work, you can't do
Can't do
it.
it.
You can't do it.
But they sold
Which
the
is kind
books,
of
so what
cool.
do they care? Yeah.
They didn't care.
Yeah.
So there was a certain few designers, and we know their names actually, of these Reticella pieces, and I go over that in the class.
Yeah. That I had not noticed that in that star, the double lines in there, because you don't see it until you point it out. Yeah.
Right. And you see the stuff below it is cross-hatched
Yep.
in the line below it. Well,
Yeah.
all the cross-hatching is actually Venetian point stitch. One of the it's one of the needle lace stitches, and so
Oh.
it actually looks like that. And in fact, the little arcs that you're seeing that make the little O's,
Mm-hmm.
you can actually see the splay of the needle lace stitch.
Huh.
It's been actually engraved in there. So I really mean these are stitch instructions
I'll be there.
in these 17th century pattern books,
Yeah.
which is pretty cool.
Yep. Excellent.
So I wanted to show you some of the other pieces that I have here.
Okay.
Oh, I know what I want to show next. Let's see. We have a dove's eye, I believe, video.
Oh, okay.
And I'll show you before that. I'll show you what dove's eye looks like on some of these
all right.
beautiful pieces.
Going back
Let's
to you.
see.
Okay, back to you
I
now.
know.
It's all right. No, that's all right.
Can you see there we go. Your there
Yep.
we go.
I got it on there. Yep.
Nope, keeps going back to the video feed. There we are.
Yeah, it should be.
Okay. There we are. So hopefully people can see that. The dove's eye bands there, which have little spider webs in them as well. Now, this is not a big leap from that vertical needle weaving that we were looking at before, because you are wrapping the horizontal and the vertical bars as you go along. And in the video that I was going to have you pull up, it actually shows how that happens with a static picture.
Yeah. Now before you get away from that, Tricia, the more solid area in between, it looks like they've done something there. 2 rows of little holes. There must be some stitch there to solidify that edge?
You mean I'm going to point to it? You
Yeah,
mean
like
here,
right there.
right there, and then right above this
Right.
one?
Yes.
Yes, that I'm calling that the band edging stitch. It is you first you work this. It looks like four-sided stitch, but it isn't. It's a hem stitch variation.
Okay.
And then underneath it, you work either a second row of it or you work a satin stitch all the way along it. And those two together keep all of your threads, the cut threads kind of from moving around too much.
So not that far of a stretch then from the functional cluster blocks then.
Yes.
Okay.
Except that it's continuous.
Yes. Yeah. Clearly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if I was to move my phone to this particular sampler, you can see that in this particular case, what they've done is they've used 3 rows of that stitch.
Oh, yes.
Instead of doing the satin stitching. And that happens to be a mark of a particular teacher of whom I don't know yet, but I've found multiple samplers of this particular teachers where they do that particular edging. And it's related. It's related because they also teach some of the same bands.
Uh-huh. I think it's neat when you can do that. You can find the teachers.
Yeah. Oh, I wish we could find out who they were, but
yeah,
not always.
All right, so going now to the dove's eye
Going to the
pattern video.
Right.
Hang on, folks. Working the system. All right, here we go. So seeing that, okay, that's up now.
So there should be a picture of a dove's eye band there, right?
Yes.
Okay. And people can probably see that you've got this wrapped, it's a square grid. You've got these wrapped bars that are vertical and horizontal, and then you have this little dove's eye that's worked in between. And you can form, by filling in the squares, like a piece of cross stitch, you can form patterns. Sometimes there's an addition of a spider web, and sometimes there is, and you can, I'm not seeing it on this particular, oh yeah.
Whoops.
If you see on the far right-hand side on the bottom, you see these two kind of, I don't know, crosses inside of circles, and some of those squares are filled in with a filling stitch, which is like a needle weaving.
Yeah.
And if you go to the next slide, we'll see how it's done.
Yeah, all right, I'm there now. Mm-hmm.
And so you can see how what you do is once you've withdrawn all your threads, you do all the wrapping like the first technique that's on the samplers. And so you're really starting to realize here that the samplers are done, that what you show on each sampler is a progression of learning technique. So the first one, you're only wrapping the bars vertical.
Mm-hmm.
The second one, you're wrapping the bars vertical and horizontal. And when you're doing the horizontal, you do these little dove's eyes in the spaces to make your patterns.
Mm-hmm.
So you've just added on to the technique. And that's how it goes down all of these samplers. These are absolutely row by row, adding more complexity to them so that you can actually make, get to the point where you get to these complicated reticella snowflakes at the bottom of it.
Yeah,
so we go to the next one.
I had read somewhere, or you had said to us about how on the samplers up at the top, the simpler stuff, they were only doing just a portion of the horizontal row, and then they would move on to something else because it was pretty much a waste of time.
It's boring.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, moving on to this next one now.
Okay. Now I don't remember what's there.
It's you got the chart
pattern.
The pattern on the right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yes. In fact, yes. In this particular case, now what we have is we have a pattern and an actual sampler, and this is something that you see Dover reprints all of these patterns from the 17th century pattern books all the time, and they talk about them as being cross-stitch patterns because each of the squares has a symbol in it, what they think is a symbol, because we're projecting our modernness on top of it. And in fact, it isn't. What it is the little crosses are the dove's eyes.
Oh.
And then all of the what looks like solid, like a black square. If you look really close at it, you'll see that they're horizontal lines.
Yep.
It's the needle weaving. And so it's a pattern instruction that's telling you what to fill in.
Mm-hmm.
And there are dozens and dozens of these, and they've been talked about as if they were cross-stitch patterns, and they're not. And we can match them up 1-to-1 to the English samplers,
As we see right here.
Wow.
Yep.
as you see right here,
Yep.
including all the way to the this particular one has these star shape, and in the actual example, they've gone around the star shape with a circle of a fillet work on it. So that
Amazing.
brings me, let's
Okay,
see.
so Kathy was wondering how many of these designs that you've come across were teaching designs, do you think, or the samplers?
Let
Are
me
they
see the question.
like teaching samplers or?
Okay. So let me back up here and tell you what I told Gary earlier today. I did a talk at Winter Tour, which is still up for those people who are registered for the symposium for the next week, on whitework samplers and reticella of the period and pattern books. And what I wanted to do, because I suspected that this was the case and it was confusing to me, was that stuff didn't match up in time. If you take a timeline and you put on when do the pattern books start and when do pieces in costume, meaning they're all the beautiful lace collars that we see, when do those start in portraits? Because the portraits can be usually dated. And then when do samplers start showing up in England? And what are the dates on the samplers? Well, surprise, surprise, you have pattern books which start just as reticella starts showing up about 20 years before it does in portraits. Then portraits and these pattern books go for a while, all the way up until about 1630. In 1630, all of a sudden there's a switchover that starts happening to bobbin lace in the portraiture and in pieces of that are in museums. About 1640 is when the first dated whitework samplers really start showing up, and they go all the way into the early 1700s. So nobody was wearing reticella at the time. So what's the purpose of doing the reticella on the samplers when London was absolutely full of young women doing what they called bone lace? If you look at the ecclesiastical court records, and what's the profession of the girls or the women who are coming in, and they're yelling at each other going, "You nasty wench, you stole my husband," and all this kind of stuff. And they would have to tell what their profession was. And so many of them were bone lace makers, bones being the bobbins. And so they were making the bobbin lace, So why are the girls filling their samplers with this work that is basically passé?
Yeah.
I don't know the answer to that question. Now, what I think may have happened was that the pattern books which had shown up in England were actually Italian, French, and German pattern books, which had been brought over to England. So there weren't that many of them. What you really needed was somebody to reprint the patterns by either buying the old blocks or by engraving them and printing them. And if you go one more slide, Gary, you're going to see that.
Yep. We're there now. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that is a print of a page from Bowler's book, and I think it's 1631. There's 4 books which are published in England in the 1630s and early 1640s, and they basically steal all the patterns, maybe the greatest hits from these earlier pattern books, publish them in England, and perhaps that is the nucleus of what's used to do all of the teaching of the samplers, because you easily can find the sampler patterns that are worked in the samplers in these particular books. So hopefully that answers some of the questions. And I wonder whether or not there's also one-off sheets that were being sold, like penny sheets, where somebody would just, do a pattern and just do 1,000 sheets of them and sell them for little.
Yeah.
These weren't valued a lot. We found them cut up inside and used as stiffener inside of other pieces of needlework, actually, and been able to identify what book was cut up. exactly what edition and was shoved in it. There's a beautiful glove, 17th century glove in the Metropolitan, and the conservator and I have worked on that. And we figured out which book was cut up. So,
uh, but
and
they're
there are, yeah, but there are
beautifully intricate patterns, and you can see why people would come to think of them as cross stitch patterns. But
yes. Well, okay. I think if you look very carefully at the one that's XXIII, which is 23, look at it much more carefully, and you'll see that the grid is a diamond. It's 45 degrees.
yeah.
It's not straight.
Mm-hmm.
So that's not a cross stitch pattern.
No.
That's actually a pattern that goes when you can take the verticals that are that modified needle weaving, and you whip two of them together, and you make yourself a diamond lattice, and you use this to fill it in.
Wow.
Yet another new thing.
Yep.
Yeah, now that's great. You just made it bigger so people can see that that's a grid that's on point.
Mm-hmm.
We don't usually publish our cross stitch patterns that way.
No.
Yeah.
There's a whole world out there.
Cross stitch it sideways and then turn it,
Right. So there's a whole world out there, if you start getting into this really carefully.
Yeah, the versatility is amazing. Yeah.
Yep. So then I wanted to show you, the next thing I wanted to show you was this sampler. I'm going to move the sampler close to me, Gary, so you can turn it on.
Okay, all right.
I'm going to try to
coming back to you. Hang on.
Yeah. Trying to angle it so that there's less reflection on it.
Okay, you got it.
Okay. So this sampler is great. It's beautiful. Now we see up here, we see these beautiful dove's eye patterns we've just been looking at. And in fact, this particular pattern is in a book, and I found that one right there. And we talked about its unusual banding that on the edges. And when I bought this and I got it, I started looking at it carefully, and I was like, ooh, maybe I didn't actually get a 17th century English sampler, even though it came out of England. Maybe I got something that's later or a different country of origin. Because as I went down the sampler, if you try to look really closely here, this is not reticella in the way we think of it. Do you see? I don't know if everybody can see on the screen here. Do you see that this is actually, it's called fillet work, meaning that the triangles are needle woven.
Back off just a hair to see if it focuses better. There we go. There we go. Yes.
Okay. So I'm calling that faux needle lace. I mean, faux reticella. Sorry. It's a version of fillet work. There's no needle woven bars. It's all wrapped. And if you go to the video, we have some static pictures of this piece in the video called faux reticella. I'm sorry.
Okay, going to that now.
Going to that now. Great.
Okay, that's up.
So you probably can see on that picture that that's not needle laced. Those aren't individual little tiny stitches there, arduously done row by row. That's just whipping the thread back and forth to fill a triangle. My God, I mean, how easy is that? And I will tell you, it's really easy. It's really easy. Now, I was thrilled. Go ahead.
Zoriana says that it resembles old Ukrainian whitework. And
yes.
She's Ukrainian.
That's great. Well, I will tell you, though, that I know it's English because I've found now many samplers that we think, because we're seeing pictures of it, far away from, in the collections. And now I found a whole bunch of samplers that are definitely English that have this technique on them. And you can see even in the pattern book that is the insert that is there on the right-hand side, the pattern that is above it, that's on my sampler, is in the actual pattern book.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And below it, and remember we were talking about this cross hatching versus straight lines in the etchings. Mm-hmm. Well, the cross hatchings, and I had to take the picture out of it that was below it. I had the band below it from a Fitzwilliam sampler, but I don't have permission to use it, online here on YouTube for permanently.
Yeah.
So I wasn't able to show it. But that one is needle laced below it, and the one above it is because of the cross hatching, not the cross hatching, but the straight lines is just this
Huh.
really easy technique.
I'll be darned.
And they mixed them. It's kind of like, to me, it's really like satisfying to find this technique, because you could make these really beautiful things that look really hard easily.
Yep. Yep.
Mhm.
And I kind of recommend it to some of my students as a fallback means. It's like, well, you didn't like that needle lace. Congratulations for trying it, but how about this? So if you go to the next picture,
Okay.
you'll see another sampler with this, and it's much more complicated with this technique.
Okay. We're there.
And that's another English piece. And again, we find the patterns in the English published books, as well as this really funky needle lace, not non-needle lace, faux needle lace technique, which is pretty amazing. So that's something I really want to, when I get a chance to get back into some museums, I want to start picking off, like, my God, it's here too. My God, it's here too. Oh,
Yeah.
okay. I see. You see the another close up showing what people might recognize as a kind of 3/4 spider web.
Yep.
Right.
And then if
So
you go
on
to the
those-
next picture, go ahead.
On the triangle ones, are the triangle ones just straight, or do they go over and under?
They go
kind of,
over and
you
under.
know?
Yeah, they
Okay.
go over and under.
So they do kind of alternate.
Yeah. And these are well-known techniques in the area of fillet work, which is also something that there was lots of pattern books for at the time. And so I think it's the last picture that shows the sampler from Carrie Taylor auctions, and with what looked like much more complicated reticella snowflakes. Yeah, you've got it magnified pretty big there.
Oh, here, I can take it down, I think.
So how do you make those little picots? I mean,
There's
it looks like, because I crochet, it looks
Uh-huh.
like crocheting done, but with like a needle
yeah,
instead
there's
of
a
a
couple
crochet.
different picot techniques, and you'll find them all
Yeah.
on the whitework samplers, and sometimes people actually went between them. There's one where you make a loop and then you actually hold the loop open and you buttonhole over it.
Okay.
And then there's one that you put the needle back into the bar and you wrap the thread around it. That's much more of the Norwegian Hardanger type. And then there's one where you do go in and out of loops and then pull the loops together, which might remind you more of the crochet one.
Yeah, or looks like a little knot, kind of.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Interesting. Yeah, because I was looking at some of this and it's like, wow, that looks like. Maybe that's why sometimes I look back at these old things you see in pictures and stuff. You're like, how did they do that? It looks like crochet, but yet it can't be. What? You know?
Right.
So.
Okay.
So that's a faux crochet. So let me show you some of these other pieces here.
All right. Back to you.
Back to me. So we just talked about all the stuff up there, which was the dove's eye bands. And then they use this set of techniques where they say, okay, now we're not going to do these wrapped bars. We're actually going to needle weave the bars. And then we're going to work motifs in them. And when you have those motifs, you get, dark versus light you're seeing, as you can see here and down here. So each of these are little motifs, and they make a pattern, right?
Right.
Well, this is a whole kind of thought process that they were using. And you can see it down here as you go down further. They're doing the same thing, very similar shaped squares, and they're putting motifs into them to make patterns. And so I have another video set for you to bring up, and I think it's called Buttonhole Bar and Reticella Grids.
It is called that. Yep.
It is called that.
Okay, that's up now.
All right. So I
incredibly
believe that there's
delicate. It's just incredibly delicate.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
And I didn't give you the video. I think what you've got up there is that incredibly delicate. You've got like a spider's web in the middle, and you've got like a bar that goes all the way around in a circle
Mm-hmm.
on these twisted bars.
Yep.
What freaks you out is, so you can see the grid down below with the pattern grid and saying, hey, here's all these different motifs you can use to build patterns with. And I go through in a whole lesson and teach everybody how to do each one of those motifs, so they can look at a pattern, and then they can go, oh yeah, I know, I just use that motif, that motif, that motif, and here's how you do it. But in order for that to work, each one of those little motifs has to be completed in one pass with a thread.
Wow.
And I'll let that sink in.
Oh, it's sunk in. It's sunk in.
It has sunk in. It's a long thread. You complete that little square, and then you move to the next square, and you fill it in. So if anybody wants to go onto my teaching website and create a little free account, they can watch the Whitework sampler video. And in there is an animation where I go through and I actually draw the path in one of those complicated, like the little motif that you see there in the corner that I've got the square box around, something like that, where I actually draw the path of the thread, and you'll see how it's done. And that's the kind of the mind blow, right, of the whole thing, is how do you actually go about doing that? And fortunately, you know, we diagrammed it all out for you, so you don't have to learn to figure it out yourself.
And every time I see something like this, I go, who figured this out? Yeah.
I know. Well, after you see all of the motifs done, diagrammed out, you go, oh, there is a logic to it.
Oh,
this
okay.
is very there's a definite logic to this.
Okay.
And that's the great part, and it's very math oriented. There's no math to be done. It's just it's logical.
Yeah.
And so I go through and show you that, and so you can actually derive the next level if you need to through it. So if you go to the next one.
How long of a thread are we talking about for that motif? Like,
well, I'll tell you, one of the things I focus in.
Yards.
I focus in a lot on how do I start and stop my threads. You know, that's the thing that really frustrates me by a lot of teaching, is that nobody talks about the ick part.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of ick, right? There's a lot of like, well, I ran out of a thread in the middle of this big, detached buttonhole, you know, lion that I'm working on. What do I do? Do I throw it away? No, there's a way to fix it. There's a way to do that, to start and stop a thread mid-thing. And so I spend a lot of time with that. And you kind of baited me for my next discussion, which was this colored reticello that I was going to talk about, because you can see where the threads start and stop. And I did that particularly so people could see, how do you start and stop a thread? Oops, I ran out of thread.
What if you get a big old knot and it shreds and you have to cut it or something? Or
well, you start and stop a new thread.
Yeah.
And it's doable. And I spend a lot of time in my stump work class as well, showing how to do that, but also in this class, because I run into the same darn problems that you do.
Yeah.
So if you go to the next picture.
All right.
You're going to see that it's the same kind of concept with the reticella grids, where it's just a shape. That is, and you know, make a triangle that points to the corner, make an arc, whatever, and you put them all together and you end up with a really beautiful pattern. And those are all done in needle lace. If you go to the third picture, I believe you see a really great photograph of one of the grids.
Wow. See, that's just
Isn't
gorgeous.
That a wow?
That's just gorgeous.
So you can really see how you can design your own stuff.
Yep.
Right? Or once you really understand that it's modular and you just need to learn how to do those shapes, then you can see almost any pattern on any 17th century sampler, and you can work it without having to have a book or a teacher or anything.
Yep.
And that was one of my goals in the class, was to get people to that point where they can design their own works, because they saw something that they just go like, oh, I fall in love with that. Or even write their name, or do, I don't know, different flowers that they want to do in it. But so this is a really lovely particular
that's gorgeous.
portion of the piece.
I should make clear, you keep referring to the class. It's your 17th century whitework sampler class. There's one going on now, and then starts in January. The next one starts in January. How you can
That's correct.
and what is the deal? You can sign up now, and how you get involved in the current one. How does that work?
So if you happen to pay the full price for the course, then I put you into the current one, which has 7 lessons already started out of 18 lessons, and then you can download, whatever you want at this particular point, and start because you get all of the materials. If you start in January, because some people like to start methodically and don't want the overwhelming of I have too many lessons at my disposal at once. And my classes are all PDFs and animations and videos. It's really your own pace, and they all are. They have projects associated with them. So if you like the projects and you just want to learn how to do the projects and be done with it, fine. Some people, what they find they do is that's how they start. They do the projects, they enjoyed it, they put the rest of it on the shelf, and about 5 years later, they come back and say, "Oh, I'm more interested now." And then
Yeah.
they go back and it's entirely new class to them because it's all the lessons about how all these different techniques are done, and they can start building their own work.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll show you the projects since you're asking that
Okay.
are in the class right now.
Going back
And
to
you
you.
sign up at your Thistle Threads website?
Yes, in the Thistle Threads shop website.
We're going back to you now.
Okay.
Okay. Yep, we've done it.
So here is this is the second project in the class. It is a lot of beautiful 17th century bands that everybody's familiar with. And then you get this opportunity to do all of this reticella in the middle of it. And this particular piece has it all done in color for the specific reason to make it very easy to see the techniques and how they go together when you're working something more complicated. The first project is this one right here. And again, it's a rather probably familiar to most of your viewers sampler. It's based off of a winter tour piece, and then you do the reticella parts at the bottom. But this one is done in linen thread, so you get the experience of doing it in linen,
Mm-hmm.
and then the other one is done in silk. And then after all of those, we go to kind of the grand poobah of things. I'm gonna move some stuff around here. And we take everything that we've learned and we put it all together and we do it in punta de aria, which is there's no linen background involved. And in this particular case, there's multiple needle lace stitches. There's 3-dimensional. I don't know. Can you see that
Yep.
thistle is 3-dimensional,
Yep.
as well as rose is 3-dimensional. All the petals come up.
Oh, I didn't. Oh, I saw. Yeah, in the pictures it shows, but I didn't appreciate that they were
Yeah.
literally layers. Like, oh, geez.
Yes,
Wow.
layers. And then you see that right here, even in the pea pods. And I don't know if you can see, there's pearls
Yep.
as the peas. And back in the pomegranate here, there's seed pearls. And so these are techniques that we explore because of actual 17th century pieces that we explore in the class. There's historic pieces shown in every lesson. And we talk about how they did things. And you can, I don't know, can you see the little,
Yep.
there's right there, there's
Yep.
seed pearls in it.
Yep.
So this is the last thing that people do in the class as a project. And what it's going to be when I finally get to the part of it is it's going to be standing up, and it's going to essentially be a nightcap, maybe for a cat. There'll be a linen piece inside of it, and this will be the edging of it. And it's going to go in my cabinet. One of my cabinets is a fun little thing. Maybe it was for a baby. I don't know, newborn baby. I don't know. I just didn't have the heart to make it for my husband because he won't wear it. Neither will my sons. So I wasn't going to make them a whole big thing and have them say to me, "No, I'm not going to wear that." But that brings me to this topic right here. I know I thought I would talk about this for a minute, which is sycamore seed pod is the linen that we use for this particular sampler right here. And when I was going to do this class, I was going to test out quite a few linens, and I was looking for something that would allow the students to have a low count linen, maybe like a 30 count linen, so that those who really wanted something of that kind of count could have something to work with.
Hmm.
I also wanted something that was medium, around a 40 count, and then I wanted something that was like as matching as possible to the original linens.
Hmm.
And so this sycamore seed pod is that. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to match this linen right here. So the process was working with Lamora Hadar at Axis Commodities and scouring for a really good high thread count linen that we could either make or have made to the color that we wanted. And so what we did, we found a company that was able to make a linen like this, and then we had to go forth and start working on the coloration of it. And what you see here is actually these are the actual color samples that were sent to me. And I don't know if you can kind of see there is a difference to them. You have to kind of look in the light. You can see this one is a little bit darker, I think. And we went through and, of course, matched them to the actual sampler. See there.
Oh yeah. Hmm.
And then I committed for this course to buy a significant amount of this linen, or to be on the hook for almost all of it. Fortunately, some of you out there in the embroidery sphere have liked this linen and have taken some of it off my my list, which is great. I know it's available at Needle in the Haystack. I'm sure Sassy Jacks gets it as well, and I sell it as well. But this linen that maybe some of you didn't know was actually custom made for this course.
Mm.
And that's kind of how some of those things happen. And you can see some of my early tests here with the first batch of linen that they sent over, trying to figure out whether or not we could very well pull out the thread, see it. And you were asking me today, Gary, about the color,
Hmm.
why I went for this kind of older color.
Yes.
And it is an old color, and it's something that did exist at the period. I wanted to have a contrast of the white thread against the slight coloration. And you can see that on this, right? You can see that the original has this contrast because it makes it easier for those of us with older eyes. Because doing very small satin stitch on a ground fabric that's the same, you lose the satin stitches and you don't know whether or not you did it. So you keep working in the same place. But if it's a little bit different color, you can actually see it. And so that was I was just trying to be nice to everybody.
And
So
for
Mary's
that, everyone
wondering,
is eternally grateful. Yes.
What were
yeah,
you saying?
Mary's
Jennifer?
wondering in the classes if there is a lot of opportunity to ask you questions and discuss. And she's
I
afraid
see
she
the
would question you to death.
so in my classes, what I have is I have this thing called Ning, which is like a Facebook, but it's private. I own the site, so nobody else can get into it unless you're given a password to it. And it's a forum where everybody who's been in my classes is, and you can start a discussion. You can have a discussion inside of the class, particular point of it, and you can post pictures. So pretty much I will tell you that there are people talking there all day long. And people will start a discussion and say, hey, whitework bands of this type of thing. And all kinds of people will get on. I will get on. I will chat away with people on it. It's a great place because so many of the students that have been in my classes have gone on to a lot of independent study. They've gone to museums. They've looked at stuff themselves. They've started forming their own opinions. And we just go talk in a debate, and we post pictures and discuss. And so, yes, there is a forum to talk. And
Nice.
I love it because people have become friends, like-minded friends on there. I know a lot of them are actually listening tonight, but we've met up. I mean, not going to say that I'm going to meet up with everybody every time, but there's been events where somebody will say, hey, I'm going to go pull this sampler out at the Metropolitan or at the Victoria and Albert, and they tell me I can have 9 friends with me.
Mm.
And people
wow.
will just, hey, I'll be there. Hey, I will get there. And then they meet and they have
Cool.
lunch afterwards together and they form friendships. And I have met Australians in Paris. I have met, I was once in a museum in England, and my son said, "Mom, they're talking about you over there around the corner." And they didn't know I was there. They were actually talking, they were some students of mine, they were talking about the samplers, and they didn't even know I was in the building, that I was in
Oh,
England
that's
at the
funny.
time. So we met and we talked and we had a good time together. So yes, there's plenty of
Cool.
opportunity to interact.
That's great. That's great when that happens. I wanted to go back and show a couple of those pictures of the little triangled pieces that you were showing,
Sure,
because the pearls show up so nicely.
please
So
do.
we'll go back over here.
Somebody wants to know if you're going to write any books about all this knowledge.
Well, I tell you, let me talk to you about the dinner conversation today that was very irritating.
Oh,
And
no.
again, I know my mother is listening, so she'll beat him up with a stick. I was saying that I've been working for a long time and I've been putting profit away. I put most of my profit away as possible because I know I've been refused several times to publish a book, and so I may have to self-publish, and
Yeah.
that's incredibly expensive. And we're talking $200,000 to $300,000 expensive. So my husband was getting a little annoyed today and about that idea, and how will you know when you'll get it back? And I'm like, God, I hope people will buy it. But so I have a little convincing to do. Either I have to find a publisher, or I have to convince the other man in my life to believe in this idea of publishing. Um,
Oh my gosh.
but I do have I think I have 5 books in me at least.
Oh.
Wow.
Easily. I was in the middle of actually working on 2 books when someone else published what I would call partial books on what I was going to publish, and so my publisher pulled the rug on me
Oh.
and in this field, and that really kind of was sad to me because I had someone publish something around the range of like 10 stitches and I had 50.
Oh.
So
Oh.
yeah, but it's hard for people when they're picking up a book to know that. So they
Right.
knew that it would be hard to actually publish and recoup their investment.
Yeah.
So hopefully time has gone on and we'll be able to do something like that.
Yeah.
Right.
But as you know,
There's-
Gary, I've recently given a talk at Textile Society of America. You were able to see it, I know.
Yep. Yep.
And it was I've been told to go off to a publishing house with that particular talk to
Oh.
try to attract attention, because it's basically, what the audience doesn't know is it's full of well, it's not quite sex, drugs, and rock and roll, but it's kind of like that. It's scandal, 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 all about gold thread. So
Yeah.
it may attract some attention.
Yeah.
So you
It's,
have
the ugly side of humans and gold thread. Yes.
Oh
yes.
my gosh. And then Sandy wants to know, how many samplers have you made?
Oh my God, I don't know. I'm like literally looking around the room, the ones I've designed or the ones that I've stitched of other people's. I don't know. Maybe Sandy, I have to say that I have been stitching since I don't know when. I was doing 4-foot long Hardanger runners when I was 12.
Wow.
So
My
I've done a
goodness.
lot of work. But if you started when you were 12, you'd have a lot of work done too.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
So no, I don't know how many samplers I've done, but I do pick classes on projects I'd like to do. Meaning classes to teach
Right.
on stuff I'd like to do. Holy Grail objects. So this is the picture that's up. It shows the pearls integrated into the embroidery, and there's a whole grouping that we study in the class of these punta d'aria pieces that are figural. They have people in them, and they have pearls all over them. They're just full of pearls. So
Those
I
look
wanted
like
to.
real pearls too.
They are real pearls.
Oh my.
Yeah. This is a lovely student of mine whose son is in China, and he picked me out a couple strands of pearls
Oh wow.
for my own embroidery work, and I bought them off of him. And these are seed pearls, so they're much more irregular.
Mm-hmm. But they're pretty.
Yeah, they are very lustrous.
I like the irregularity.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter. I mean, somebody could
Yeah,
easily
no.
use beads.
Hmm.
I'm not a stickler for the historic reproduction. I mean, even though it looks like I am, I'm not. I'm actually really thrilled when I see contemporary uh, interpretations of these techniques. But in order to really understand the period, I have to figure out how to do it exactly the way that they did it, or explain why I'm doing it a different way, just from the standpoint of what I'm trying to get to, which is the writing.
Yeah.
Um, and so, but to me, I mean, I would absolutely love to see a contemporary, I don't know, political statement or something like that done in this technique. I mean, it'd be just like exciting to me to see somebody take it and take it another level. I haven't been able to do that myself yet, but I know I discussed with you last time that in my caskets, I have some really unusual caskets that I'm planning on doing with dragons and krakens and things like
Oh
that.
yeah.
I mean, this work is just gorgeous.
Yeah,
Oh
but
yeah.
you can see there on the pictures you're flying through how it's done. You have the pattern underneath a piece of contact paper. That's architectural drafting contact paper, which is blue, so it makes it easy to see your white work.
Hmm.
And you stitch your threads down to form your background, and then you do your buttonhole stitches or other stitches on it.
Hmm.
And for me, the big thing is trying to figure out the progression and teaching everybody how to figure out the progression of what do you do in what order, because that's always the confusing thing to me is, well, how do you do everything in the right order?
Yeah.
So that kind of leads me to the pictures 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 that you have, Gary.
Okay. One is up.
One is up. Great. So this is a beautiful Reticella snowflake for one of these pictures, and I spend four lessons on this kind of work, trying to teach everybody how to take a look at it. I mean, it looks super complicated, right, when you start off with it, but there is a logic to it. And so if you look at 1, you say, wow, that's pretty complicated. If you go to 2, every single time, the first thing you do is you do the X and the plus. You
Hmm.
work those threads, and then you do your needle lace on them, and that's the beginning. So every single design, that's the first thing you do.
Okay.
Then, and I do this kind of thing in the class where I show people the order, picture after picture. The next thing is you have to establish some circles, because essentially all of the different shapes attach to the circles. And so these blue circles are all worked next. And then if you go to number 4, you see, then you have the ability to go between these, let's say the X bars and the circle with one of those green arcs.
Right in there.
Right, because they can attach to the different points. So you're looking at things and saying, okay, that thing attaches to 2 different points there. So obviously that's done after the things it's attached to.
Hmm.
And you kind of back up sequentially in order to figure out what the progression of any pattern that you come to. And that's what I mean about these pattern books where they showed patterns that you can't do, because they will have triangles that are floating in space. You're like, well, you can't do that. And in fact, with needle lace, a lot of needle lace is directional, meaning that it curls
Hmm.
if you don't have it attached to something else. And so if you have a point of a triangle just hanging out there, it will curl up on itself. It won't lay flat the way that they wanted this lace to lay.
Hmm.
So then you can go to number 5 and you see the last bits of it. All of these little, what they did is they did a little edging on it, and they did all the picots at the same time in the purple.
Yep.
So there is a logic to it.
Hmm. Fascinating.
So Sandy's asking about the
Thread.
oh,
Yeah.
I see 2 questions I'd like to answer if you wouldn't mind. Mary's question. Can I ask the second question of hers?
Go for it. Yeah.
So Mary asks, I want to do a casket. When might you reveal some future caskets coming out? That's a really important question. My cabinet maker, my paper maker, my marbler, all of the people in the chain are retiring.
Oh.
I started this casket work over 10 years ago, and
I'm gonna
the
I'm gonna
people
put
that
you back. I'm gonna put you back on the
okay,
screen now.
sure.
so people can see who's talking at them. Okay.
Okay. So, anyways, that's a really important thing is that I started this over about 12 years ago, the casket work. And the people that I would attract to that casket work are the people who are late in their careers, who have extreme expertise to help me do this. Well, we're 12 years along and they're retiring,
Hmm.
and there aren't people behind them. So, because a lot of people, a lot of these, beautiful crafts are they're kind of going away. And so the end of the caskets are now, and there are literally 99 left.
Hmm.
And that's the harmony class. And that's it.
And
And
then
it's done.
and there's no foreseeable way of getting more. Then that's going to
No,
be it. Yeah.
that will be it. Mostly because maybe I could try to convince somebody to make a simpler version for me, but the paper maker is already only finishing the paper for the harmony before she fully retires.
Oh.
And she is one of two paper makers that exist that might be able to make the right paper, the 17th century paper. And he is past retired. The other guy is past retirement, and he is on his dream project of working on Japanese, something master level Japanese, craftsman thing. So he's only my backup if something horrible happens and she can't complete the paper. So this is really where this is. It's the end.
Yeah.
So I know because I hear from people all the time, well, someday I'll make a casket. And I'm like, no, that day is either now or it is not now.
Yeah.
Because it's, and it's, it's just the way it is. So the next thing is the size of thread used for punta de aria. That's an interesting question because we're using particular sizes of thread in this course. They're the smallest sizes of linen thread that I could get, but it is still significantly bigger than what they used originally because we have a climate change and we have had wars. The wars in World War I and World War II, as you all know, were on the fields of Belgium, where linen was primarily grown for lace making. And the species of linen flax was eliminated through the burning and all of what happened in World War I. And so the species that we have now don't grow in Belgium. They're being grown in Ukraine and other Balkan countries because of how the climate has changed and the growing seasons have changed. And so the length of the linen, and when you're working with trying to get this linen fabric, or you're working with the lace making ladies trying to find the best linen thread you can use for these samplers, you learn so much about linen. But we don't have the same linen thread that we had at the time period of the 17th century time period. So I personally find that frustrating because I can't fully emulate what they did at that time. They were working with things that were thinner than 300 over 2, and we can only get down to about 100 over 2 thread.
Right, which is maybe why, because you hear that it's been described as being really soft. But
right.
You're like, a lot of times the linen, you're like, well, it's kind of rough. And I know it does get softer the more you wash it and use it. But maybe because it was so much finer in that other species.
Yeah.
If it's gone, then,
yes. Well, and you see that also when you're pulling the threads out of linen fabrics to make some of this work. Some of it will shred a little bit because the staple length is shorter than the original thread. And so they can't spin it as fine. And that can be frustrating, to someone who's sitting here with a real 17th century piece next to me. What you can do is you can find silk threads that are as thin as what they used, but then you're left with the needle problem, which is a fine needle that has a blunt tip, because we don't really make any fine needles with blunt tips anymore. We only go down to 28 tapestry. But what we really need is something that's in the kind of not quite beading needle, but a litlittle bit bigger than beading needle with a blunt tip. So either you can sit there with some sandpaper and try to make the right needle, because you have to kind of use the blunt tip to push each needle lace stitch to the side so you don't split it. And I find that the needle is the next, because you can use the silk, but the next problem to it. So I don't try to frustrate the students. I try to use materials that are easy to handle. Most of the silk reticella or cut work was done with floss silk, an untwisted silk, like a swallow ball. And I have worked with it, and by God, is it gorgeous. But it can be a challenge for this type of work where you're really manhandling it, and a
Wow.
lot of us have dry hands. So we work with Swag Goblin instead to do some of like the work. So hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah.
Wow.
The fact that a war wiped out a whole species of flax, you'd think that
Yeah.
somewhere along the way a little patch had been saved, but
I know.
wow.
I know. Well, so this is actually kind of speaks to what I'm trying to write about, is that big discontinuities in political or economic systems actually had an impact on embroidery. And that's actually kind of my overall thesis. And so when something goes away, you have to kind of like go, okay, what was happening around it and why did it go away?
Yeah.
And this really came home to me when a long time ago, when my son was very little, about 18 years ago, my husband had to take over a company in Germany, and I had injured my arm working, repetitive stress at work. And so I had to take about a year off. And we went to Germany, into this town called Aachen. And it's on the Belgian-Dutch border. And, that's interesting. So I had to look some stuff up. And my husband said, hey, this is really interesting. These people do this when they pass each other on the road. And I was like, well, that's kind of odd. Not this, but this. And he said, it comes from needle making. They roll the needles this way. It was the center of medieval and 17th century and modern needle making.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
And Greenwich, England. And I went, boing. So, cut the story short, I found the world expert in needles living in town. And every time we went to Germany, which we had to do 4 times a year, Horst and I sat in his laboratory because he was the vice president of a needle making company, a real engineer and a historian, and had founded the Fastenings Museum that is in Aachen. And every time a needle making company had gone out of business, he would buy their archive. And he was very German. He had all these very little drawers marked what company, what time frame, what type of needle. And so it got to the point where I would come with a picture of an embroidery, maybe some threads or something, or a piece of the embroidery. And I would say, Horst, we can't do this anymore. Why can't we do this anymore? This is what I see. This is whatever like that. And he'd go, oh! And he'd go and he'd pull a little drawer out and he'd give me a needle. And what he told me, so I have this collection of needles, is that in World War I and World War II, the centers of needle making were Greenwich, England, and Aachen, Germany. That's where all the companies were. And they needed iron and steel for guns and ammunition.
Wow.
And so by law, they told the needle companies to eliminate product lines. And that's why we can't do certain embroidery today.
Because those needles are gone. Jeez.
They're gone.
Wow.
So Horst was fantastic. There's a whole gold thread needle story that's involved with that, but I could tell that a different time. so that's what you talk about when you say that the flax went away. That's kind of the story of decorative arts. That some things go away because of unfortunate, things that are not planned.
Yep.
Wow.
Tricia, I could sit here for another hour, but
I know. We're getting getting late.
I think we better end it here. Save some for another time.
Oh, I do have one thing on it to tell people. Okay, we've talked a lot about thread development, and if anybody's interested in a free project, this little ornament is right now on my teaching website, which you can get to from my main shopping page, and it's got all kinds of different new threads on it if they want to download the instructions. And there's actually a little kit.
Okay.
So,
beautiful.
There you go.
Folks, her website is thistle-threads.com. Make sure you get the hyphen in there, thistle-threads.com, and then you'll see it all there. Yep. Okay, Tricia, thank you. Fantastic.
Yeah, it was amazing.
That was terrific. All right, we're out, folks. Thanks very much. Hope to see a bunch of you on Sunday for the meditative stitching. And thanks for joining us tonight. Thanks again, Tricia.
All right.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.